Welcome into Around the Horn. I'm Ben McKee, joined by Ryan Schumpert. We're here at Lindsey Nelson Stadium. Just wrapped up a terrific weekend of baseball here on campus. Arkansas does take the series, but it was full of three extraordinary baseball games. Tennessee loses by a run on Friday, wins on the dramatic Max Ferguson walk-off home run on Saturday, and then loses again on Sunday 3-2. Tennessee had the tying run on first in the bottom of the ninth inning, the winning run at the plate, but Liam Spence flew out to right field to end the game. And Ryan, normally we would talk about baseball here, but the takeaway after the game was kind of the spat that Tony Vitello and Arkansas coach Dave Van Horn got into. Just, I guess, how surprised were you to see those two kind of get into it after the game?
Yeah, that was a little surprising. We got 27 innings of incredible baseball and then a little extracurricular added onto it afterwards. And yeah, I mean, it was surprising. I don't know if I had a great feel for what their relationship was like. I maybe wasn't surprised that it wasn't quite as buddy-buddy as people kind of let on or made it out to be. And obviously, those guys are going to be complimentary of each other when they're talking to the media. That's just how those situations work. But yeah, that was an interesting kind of look a little bit deeper and obviously a little bit of rockiness between those two former boss and then now Vitello, coach at Tennessee.
Absolutely. And it was surprising, but it wasn't surprising. What wasn't surprising was while Arkansas was going through its handshake line after winning the game, and as Arkansas was making its way out to left field, Arkansas was waving goodbye to Tennessee's players. Tennessee trying to go out to right field, Arkansas trying to go out to left field for their post-game meetings. That was not surprising that the two teams and the players were jawing back and forth. Again, the players were waving goodbye. Evan Russell either did not like that in general, or maybe somebody said something to him specifically, but Evan Russell kind of started walking towards the Arkansas side of things, and both teams started inching a little bit closer to one another towards center field, but eventually went their separate ways. So that wasn't surprising, and that was after the two coaching staffs shook hands and shook hands in quotations. Is very quick handshake, and there was jawing going back and forth, and then that wasn't necessarily surprising again because it was a very intense weekend here at Lindsey Nelson. But what was surprising was the dramatics with Tony Vitello seeking out Dave Van Horn behind home plate after the two teams had got done talking to one another, and they had a spirited conversation for about 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a little more civil, a little bit more low key than the talk right after the game. But I mean, it didn't take long watching Vitello to see that he was pretty heated, and they talked for 3-5 minutes somewhere in that range, and they left without a handshake, without a pat on the back or anything. They went their separate ways. So definitely an interesting dynamic to add on to what was a really entertaining series.
Absolutely. And Tony Vitello said after the game that it started with Dave Van Horn maybe saying some things about what happened on the field. And then Tony opened up his mouth and said some things about off the field stuff that maybe he should have kept to himself or not brought up in that particular moment. And then in terms of like Evan Russell maybe following Tony, because Tony was the one leading the charge there when the two teams were kind of inching close to one another. It was Tony opening up his mouth first. This is what Tony Vitello said, and then the players kind of followed his lead. So that was interesting to see. Obviously, like I said a moment ago, it was surprising, but it also wasn't surprising. It wasn't surprising because it was a very intense weekend, but it was surprising to see Tony Vitello and his old boss go back and forth. And it was a very intense weekend, and that's because we witnessed three great baseball games.
Absolutely. And, you go back and you said every single game by one run. I think 15-16 was the final score in the weekend. And, maybe the funny thing is you think about the one point in the weekend, it felt like things had separated a little bit. And that was Saturday afternoon in the late inning games. And of course, Tennessee comes back and scores 3 runs in the ninth and wins the game. So incredibly 27 innings that were really intense, really tight. And I think you saw the hitting from both teams kind of shine most of the weekend, and it kind of was a little bit reversed. And you get to Sunday, you expect a high-scoring game, and both starting pitchers was really, really good. We know the talent's there for Blade Tidwell, but even though he said it wasn't his best start of the year because Tennessee didn't win, I think that's his best start of the year, period. And then when you account for who he was going up against, it makes it all the more impressive. And that's obviously one of Tennessee's most talented pitchers, and it seems like he's starting to get right and really starting to get a feel for things as Tennessee gets into the postseason.
He was terrific on Sunday, and again, he said after the game that it was not his best outing because Tennessee did not win the baseball game, and you love to hear that from him. But it was his best outing, at least from the the person watching the game standpoint, our standpoint, vantage point, and statistically, it was a career high in strikeouts with 8. Uh, and then when you consider the team that he was pitching up against, arguably the best hitting lineup in the country, the number one team in the country. So Blake Tidwell was absolutely tremendous. And then things just didn't necessarily go Tennessee's way towards the end of the Sunday game to drop the series. Offensively, you left runners on base, and then in the field, maybe left Blade in a little bit too long. He walks the leadoff batter in the 8th inning, if I remember correctly, and he eventually comes around to score. So things just didn't break Tennessee's way towards the end of that Sunday game.
Yeah, no doubt. And it was the small things that stood out about really all weekend and the Sunday game in particular. And it wasn't necessarily all Tennessee playing bad. You had the bloop double. Drew Gilbert kind of misreads that, probably gets to that ball. But the fact that that thing turns into a double, and then again all weekend, untimely wild pitches or pass balls with runner on second, that happens, gets him over. And Tidwell wasn't able to get a strikeout, and that run gets in. And I guess to me, that's kind of one of my takeaways is how brutal the 2 earned runs will look for Tidwell, because gave up 2 hits and just 1 hit in those 2 innings. And obviously he left that runner on that scored in the 8th inning. So a great outing for him, and really intense to little things. And that's what was so impressive about Arkansas, and in turn impressive about Tennessee all weekend, is Arkansas, I think, made one mistake, that double play ball they should have turned in Saturday's game. Besides that, we're past just not making mistakes. They were making really hard plays. And anytime on Sunday they got runners with a chance to score, they got them in Tennessee. The fact that they were able to play so close and so tight and look like they were capable of not only playing with number 1 team in the country, but being the number 1 team in the country, it just looked just as good as Arkansas for a lot of that series. So I think that stands out, and it's a good lesson for Tennessee at just how small that margin for error is when you're playing the Arkansas, Vanderbilts. They should have that lesson going into postseason play.
And watching to the naked eye, Arkansas does appear to be maybe a smidge better than Tennessee. They do everything so well, whether it's defensively or at the plate, on the mound, bullpen with Kevin Kopps coming out of the bullpen. And he was the difference in the series to me on Friday. Throws 66 pitches and shuts Tennessee down at the end of the game, and then does give up a run here in the 9th inning on a Connor Pavolony RBI single, but shut down Tennessee at the end of this game as well. To me, he was the difference in the weekend.
I would completely agree, and I would almost expand it to the whole Arkansas bullpen, because obviously, I don't remember who was in there in this 9th inning on Saturday. He obviously struggled. I don't think they hardly gave up another run besides
the freshman Jackson Williams, I believe.
Wiggins, I think.
Wiggins, yes.
Wiggins. Yeah. So besides that, and then the Cops gave up 1 run here. I don't think they gave up another run the rest of the weekend. And you look back at the Friday and Saturday game, Tennessee was able to run the starter early, and then Arkansas's mid relievers, who they've been good, but they hadn't been elite. They kind of came in and steadied the game for Arkansas in both those games. Obviously allowed them to come back and win Friday, allowed them to come back and get the lead Saturday before Tennessee took it back. But it's just what a weapon Kevin Kopps is one of the takeaways, because you're sitting there today, he's going to go. I don't think you knew he was going to go 3 2/3, which is impressive that he was able to do that after how much he threw on Friday. But it felt like Tennessee needed to take advantage of those opportunities they had. I think it was in the 5th and the 6th inning with the bases loaded, and then 2 on. Kopps comes in the 6th inning, shuts him down. Kyle Booker is in the 3-2 count, really intense at bat. You're thinking push it, get it to Liam Spence, or I guess it would have been Connor Pavolony. He had a great weekend, but weren't able to do it. And Kopps from there on was just absolutely locked down and didn't give Tennessee a whole lot of chances.
If Jack Leiter wasn't having the season that he's having, it feels like Kevin Kopps would be talked about more amongst SEC baseball fans and college baseball fans in general. But he was the difference. And to go and circle back to something that you somewhat brought up, I walk away from this weekend thinking that Tennessee is more than capable of winning a national championship. And I say that because they just competed with the number 1 team in the country for 3 straight days. And I thought Connor Pavolony summed it up perfectly after the game, that they had them on the ropes for 3 straight games. And the number 1 team in the country was nervous for 3 straight games. So there's maybe some concern about pitching depth when you get into a regional or the SEC tournament or the College World Series. If Tennessee makes it that far, some concerns with pitching depth maybe. But still, this Tennessee team can play with anybody. They can beat anybody. And that showed this weekend, because I said it coming in. I think Arkansas is the best team in the country, and they showed that they can play with them. They showed that they can beat them. And if a couple breaks go their way, they're walking out of here with a series win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what stands out was what Tennessee's bats were able to do this weekend. They'd heated up the last 3 weekends, and you knew it was legitimate, but to the same degree, you were playing lesser competition. How much of that can they carry over against the top team like Arkansas? And they really did. The power was there all weekend. I guess didn't have any homers on Sunday, but I thought one of the biggest moments of the weekend is kind of overlooked is the back-to-back homers Tennessee got with 2 outs in the 7th inning of Saturday's game from Max Ferguson, and then again in the 8th from Jordan Beck, because Arkansas kept the pressure on Tennessee all weekend. That was another common theme. They were consistently getting insurance runs late in games. Tennessee was able to match with some on Saturday to keep them in striking distance and then make it possible for them to have that big 9th inning that they did. So the offense is one of the things that stands out, I guess, the biggest to me. And then Blade Tidwell, I've talked about it at length. He's the most talented pitcher Tennessee has. When he's clicking, Tennessee has 2 really good starters, and their pitching staff comes a lot more formidable.
And we also need to highlight Will Heflin, because Will Heflin was terrific during Saturday's game, and he did give up 3 runs there in the 6th inning. But if you were to ask Tony Vitello, or I would imagine Will Heflin himself, 3 runs in 6 innings, are you taking that today? I think that they would both take it 10 out of 10 times. And although Arkansas was able to distance themselves somewhat late in that game, Will Heflin is the reason that Tennessee had a chance at the end of that game to upset Arkansas, because he did not allow a base runner until the 5th inning, did not allow a hit until the 6th inning. He was just absolutely tremendous. And I tweeted this out on Saturday afternoon, but Tennessee has lost 3 opening games this season, just 3. They lost to Alabama, the opening game of that series. They lost to number 2 Vanderbilt, the opening game of that series, and then on Friday to number 1 Arkansas. And each time Will Heflin has got the ball, and each time Tennessee has won that game after losing the opener.
Yeah, it's the reason he's fit into that role so well. You know, when he started there, it was a question of will he stay there the whole year, and I think that's why he's kind of taking the reins of it. Is when Tennessee's needed him the most, he's been the best, and when the opponent has been the highest, it seems like he's been his best. So just a fantastic performance, and it made it really hard on Tony Vitello, because I guess the MO on Heflin's kind of been 2 times through the order. It's really solid. That 3rd time, you got to have a quick hook. He enters the 3rd time not having given up a hit, or I guess I think the 9-hitter had gotten the first hit all game. So it was, you got to have the confidence in him, and that's Vitello has been consistent on that theme all year. When pitchers are pitching well, his starters, he's going to give them a little more rope than the average fan might expect.
Which is why Blade Tidwell came back out there for that first hitter of the 8th inning today.
Exactly. So I was really showed a lot from Heflin, and was just crucial. Again, he left the game with trailing, I guess, but he put Tennessee in a great spot to win. And again, kind of going on the theme of him being really good after losses, a lot of those games, not a ton of run support either. So Tennessee's needed him not only just to get us in the 5th inning, 3 or 4 runs. They needed him to be really stellar, and he's been that in all 3 games.
He's been terrific. And now Tennessee exits this weekend with a chance to win the SEC East next weekend. They'll technically also have a chance to win the SEC as a whole, but because they lost today's game to Arkansas, they are now a game back of Arkansas, and Arkansas will need to have their worst weekend of the season, their last weekend of the season. I don't even know who they play off the top of my head.
Florida.
Okay, they play Florida, so that's quite possible. Now, Florida lost today to Georgia, and Florida has been up and down at times, but Florida is definitely capable of knocking off Arkansas, but it would probably take a sweep of Arkansas for Tennessee to have a chance at winning the league, because Tennessee has no easy weekend next weekend either. They go to South Carolina, and South Carolina is a top 20-ish team. So Tennessee, if they can win 2 of 3 in Columbia and get some help from the Gators, and they also need some help from Kentucky as well, because Vanderbilt hosts Kentucky to end the season, and theoretically on paper that should be a sweep as well. It was also supposed to be a sweep for Mississippi State this weekend when they played Missouri. That did not go according to plan, as Mississippi State lost that series. So big weekend coming up, and although they may need to get some help elsewhere, Tennessee has a chance to win the SEC regular season title, and if not the whole league, then at least the SEC East title.
Yeah, and that's a huge game that's going on as we record. Ole Miss playing Vanderbilt in Game 3. Vanderbilt loses, they'll be half a game behind Tennessee. If they win, they'll be half a game ahead. Last I saw was 10-3 Ole Miss. Not sure if that's changed. So that's a massive game. And yeah, you look, Florida obviously capable of getting a series win. Hard to think they sweep, and Florida especially has struggled on the road this year, and that series is in Fayetteville. So it's hard to think even Florida gets a series win, but it's certainly possible. Florida's got a really good team. And then a note on South Carolina, they've kind of been reeling the past few weeks entering this weekend. They won the first 2 games against Kentucky, and they were up big in Game 3 today. So South Carolina's starting to kind of get their legs under them, and they're in that 20 potential regional host list, and I think they're kind of probably in that 17 to 20 range. But that shows there's going to be a lot to play for next weekend for South Carolina, and obviously a lot to play for Tennessee. So it should be a really interesting series and another great opportunity for this Tennessee team in the regular season.
And the last thing I want to mention is the environment here at Lindsey Nelson Stadium all weekend was just tremendous. From the moment Peyton Manning threw out the first pitch on Friday until the final out of today's game, the fans were all the way into the game. Multiple standing ovations. Max Ferguson received a standing ovation when he stepped to the plate in his first at bat. Tony Vitello received a loud cheer when he was announced on Friday. Fans were cheering him after the game when he and Dave Van Horn were getting into it. So the atmosphere this weekend was absolutely electric and awesome, and hard not to think what could be if Tennessee does expand the seating here at Lindsey Nelson Stadium.
Absolutely, and I think that's something Vitello kind of said before the series. It's like it'll be good to look back after and see what can be. And no one asked him about it today. I don't think he was probably in the mood. But that's a question I want to ask him on Tuesday after the Belmont game, see what his takeaways were. And yeah, it was a fantastic environment. And I will also say credit Tennessee. All three games, they gave the fans something to cheer about early. 5-run first inning on Friday, 2-run first inning on Saturday, and then Jordan Beck gets a double play, throwing a runner out at home to end the first inning or top of the first inning on Sunday. So Tennessee came out ready to play all three games, gave the fans a lot to cheer about, and the fans brought it all weekend long for 27 innings.
Evan Russell also made a heck of a play just down the left field line along the bullpen fence. That should be a Sports Center top 10 play. But just a terrific weekend of baseball for Tennessee and the fans. Tennessee didn't necessarily play bad baseball just because they lost the series. I felt like it was a very evenly matched weekend between both teams, and both teams, I think, are destined for success in the postseason. Brent Hubbs was out of pocket today, so I filled in for Mr. Hubbs. He will be back with you later this week, along with Schumpert, to get you all ready for the Tennessee-South Carolina series, the final series of the regular season. I will also be contributing some preview stuff as well, so we encourage you to stay locked in to VolQuest.com as Tennessee is just around the corner from postseason play, heading down to Hoover for the SEC tournament. So for Ryan Schumpert, I'm Ben McKee. This has been Around the Horn from Lindsey Nelson Stadium.